Hi everybody, and welcome to another video here for Theory of Knowledge. So in the preceding videos we've talked a little bit about you, the TOK student. We've also talked a little bit about the organizing structure for the Theory of Knowledge class when we discussed ways of knowing and areas of knowledge. In this video what we're going to begin to introduce are the ways that we organize knowledge. And we can think about this in a general sense, or we can think about it in particular to TOK. And a lot of the language that I'm going to be using to describe this initial way of organizing knowledge is taken straight from the IBO and their descriptions of the TOK course. And so you can see here on the board, I have two circles. I have a circle for shared knowledge, and I have a circle for personal knowledge. And I'm going to switch to a pointer that's a little more efficient. Yeah, shared knowledge and personal knowledge. Now, these are fairly straightforward concepts, but I'm going to try to add a little bit more meat to them so that we can understand them in the ways we're going to need to understand it for TOK. So shared knowledge is pretty much what it sounds like. What is it that we know as a group of people? This could be a group of ABF students, or it could be a group of teenagers, or it could be, say, a group of scientists. So what knowledge is out there that is shared? Then we have personal knowledge. What is it that you as an individual understand? What is it that you as an individual have knowledge of? And so there's always going to be this dynamic between shared and personal knowledge. But I want to add a little bit more detail to these terms, shared and personal knowledge, so that we can understand them from a TOK's perspective. So as you can see here on the right side of the board, I have a whole bunch of different adjectives. And so we're going to pair up the adjective with shared versus personal knowledge. Now, these aren't to say that these adjectives are only going to be attributable to the places where I put them, but we're talking about in general. So our first adjective here is conceptual, okay? So the idea that knowledge is conceptual, that it is about concepts in ideas. I think this is an adjective that best goes with shared knowledge. Shared knowledge is about concepts, mathematical concepts, scientific concepts, ethical theories, if we're discussing morality. So it's always about conceptual ideas. What is it that we're discussing? Conversely, personal knowledge is going to be contextual, in that the context in which that knowledge is brought about is going to be important. And when we talk about personal knowledge, you have a way of understanding certain events in your life. You have a way of understanding certain aspects of shared knowledge. So it's still very contextual for you. So the way you understand something on a personal level depends on context. Historical. I'm going to take this adjective and I'm going to put it into shared knowledge. The knowledge that we develop over time as a broader culture, as a society, as a group of people who are studying particular areas of knowledge, has a history to it. All right? It has a way in which it has developed over time, and that's, in one way, what we share between each other, is the development of that body of knowledge. So shared knowledge is historical. Meanwhile, personal knowledge is going to be experiential. It depends on experience, all right? The way you come to understand something is going to depend a lot on your experience. If you are a religious believer, you have that experience, and so that's going to inform the way that you develop your personal knowledge of different ideas and events. If you're not a religious person, that's a different experience. And so you're going to have a sort of different personal knowledge of particular ideas. Methodology is our next idea here. Shared knowledge has a methodology to it. It's methodological. So if you're a scientist, you develop your knowledge with a particular method or a series of methods. If you're an artist, you might have a method to the way that you share your art, that you create your art so it ultimately can be shared with others. So there is a method to shared knowledge. Historians do things in a particular way. Economists do things in a particular way. There's a method. Now, when it comes to what we know, if we know how to do something, I know how to play tennis. You may know how to sew, right? Know how, that's personal knowledge, right? If you know how to do something. And we can contrast that with know that, knowing that. I know that the differential of x squared is 2x. Hopefully I remember that correctly. So you know about something. You know that something is, all right? To begin to understand these mild distinctions at times between shared and personal knowledge, I'm going to try to come up with a few examples and analogies. The first one I'm going to talk about here is maybe an analogy with sports. So in particular, team sports. If you're on a team, then you have to have personal knowledge, how to play your position, how to do what you need to do in order for the team to be successful. And then the team sort of has a shared knowledge of how to play the game, how to work as a team, ultimately how to generate the quote-unquote knowledge of hopefully trying to win. So there's an analogy between the role of an individual and the role of a group if we think about something like team sports. Or maybe think about music and being in a band or being in an orchestra. Every player needs to know how to play his or her instrument and hopefully play it well, so that when those pieces of personal knowledge are combined, we get the shared knowledge of a piece of art. All right, the members of the band come together to ultimately form something that's greater than the individual parts. So if you think about this sort of team structure in sports or this band structure in music, you begin to see where the distinctions between shared and personal knowledge might come into play. Here's a couple of other ideas that I was thinking about as I was trying to come up with ways to explain how shared and personal knowledge interact. Because as you can see here, maybe I should have made it bigger, but there's overlap, of course, between shared and personal knowledge. These things interact with one another. So for example, teachers, right? If we teachers do our job reasonably well, what we are essentially doing is taking knowledge that is out there, that is to be shared, and we're helping it become your personal knowledge. We're trying to turn the shared into the personal, right? I teach chemistry for a lot of my day here at school, so I'm trying to take the shared knowledge of chemistry concepts and turn them into bits of personal knowledge for my chemistry students. At the same time, hopefully what teachers try to do is understand students as individuals so that we may have different avenues by which we can allow people to access the shared knowledge. What experience do you have in a particular subject area, right? That's then your personal knowledge. And how could a teacher extend that into the shared knowledge? So we teachers are constantly trying to figure out ways to connect the shared with the personal. Another idea I came up with is folks like artists. Right? Art is both a personal experience and a shared experience. And some of the best artists, the artists that we come to know through time, what they've managed to do is take their personal understanding of a particular art movement or even a particular event that might be going on in the world. They've been able to take their personal understanding of that and turn it into a shared experience for the rest of us. You can think of the great artists in history, or even the great groups of artists in history. They were somehow able to take the personal and translate it so that the rest of us could understand something about the world a little bit deeper and perhaps in a different way. At the same time, artists often are paying attention to what's going on around them and using their art to come to a personal understanding of what's going on around. So teachers and artists often play around with the connections, the sort of teal region of space I've got there between the shared and the personal. All right, so the distinction and the connections between shared and personal knowledge are going to be a constant refrain that we're going to come back to throughout the TOK course. And this connection is one part of a broader idea that we're going to develop in later videos and in later class discussions, namely the TOK knowledge framework. As I'll introduce later, This is essentially a way of constructing knowledge so that we can figure out a way to introduce different areas of knowledge to you as students and to you as TOK students. So there's going to be plenty more detail on that later on, but think about this idea of a knowledge framework. We'll get to that later.